30 years ago, on the morning of March 2, 1996, 25-year-old Alicia Showalter Reynolds left her home in Baltimore, Maryland, and started what should have been an ordinary drive. She was headed to Charlottesville, Virginia, where she planned to spend the day shopping with her mother. The trip was familiar. The destination was waiting. By all accounts, there was no reason to believe anything was wrong. But Alicia never arrived. Hours later, her car was discovered abandoned along U.S. Route 29 in Culpeper County. Witnesses reported seeing her on the side of the highway, with an unidentified man standing near her vehicle. The man was described as driving a pickup truck. Then Alicia vanished. As investigators began searching for answers, a troubling picture started to emerge. Other women reported encounters with a similar stranger along the same highway. Some said he tried to get their attention while they were driving. Others said he claimed there was something wrong with their vehicle. What began as a missed meeting on a rainy March morning would become one of Virginia's most enduring unsolved mysteries. And at the center of it all is a simple question: who was the man waiting on Route 29? In 1996, travel along routes like this carried a level of dependence that is difficult to imagine today. There were no smartphones to instantly share locations, no GPS tracking to reconstruct movements in real time. In many stretches, there were no cameras watching the roadside at all. If something happened between exits, it often happened out of view. For investigators, this environment became a critical part of the puzzle. The highway itself offered few answers. There were no consistent surveillance systems to track movement between towns. There was no central record of who passed whom or when, and that uncertainty would define everything that followed. Alicia was 25 years old. She was married. She was living in Baltimore while pursuing a PhD at Johns Hopkins University. Nothing about that morning suggested anything out of the ordinary. It was a planned family visit, with enough time built into the schedule for a comfortable arrival around 10:30 a.m. But Alicia never made it. At first, there was no immediate cause for alarm. Her mother, Sadie Showalter, arrived at the meeting location and waited, expecting Alicia to appear at any moment. As the minutes passed, the absence became harder to explain. Alicia was not late in a way that fit her usual patterns. By 11 a.m., concern had begun to set in. By 11:15, Sadie made the call that would shift the day from expectation to uncertainty, contacting Alicia's husband, Mark Reynolds, back in Baltimore. Mark suggested the possibility of weather delays, fog, light rain, slower traffic on the highway. At that point, nothing indicated anything more serious than a delayed arrival. But hours passed without contact. Alicia did not call. She did not arrive. She did not appear at the meeting point in Charlottesville. By late afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond a simple delay. And later that evening, the first concrete clue appeared. Around 6 p.m., a Virginia state trooper located Alicia's vehicle, abandoned along Route 29 in Culpeper County, roughly 50 miles from her intended destination. Inside and around the vehicle, investigators found an unusual detail. A white paper napkin had been tucked beneath the windshield wiper. It appeared to signal mechanical trouble, a gesture commonly associated with roadside assistance situations. But when the car was examined more closely, there was no mechanical failure. No clear explanation for why it had stopped. No obvious reason for why it had been left behind. The following day, the case moved into public attention. Local news began reporting Alicia's disappearance. Police established a roadblock near the location where her vehicle was found, hoping to identify anyone who may have seen her before or after the stop. Witness accounts began to emerge. At least 3 people reported seeing Alicia on the roadside near her car. She was not alone. She was seen speaking with a white male, standing beside a dark-colored pickup truck. The description would soon become central to the investigation. As more reports came in, investigators began to understand that this was not an isolated encounter. Nearly 20 women contacted authorities with similar stories. They described a man in a pickup truck traveling along Route 29 who would signal drivers, sometimes by flashing headlights or honking, drawing attention to what appeared to be vehicle trouble. In some cases, he would stop and inspect vehicles himself. In others, he would offer assistance directly. The pattern was consistent enough that investigators began to suspect a rehearsed method rather than random encounters. A woman traveling in a neighboring county reported an encounter that closely matched the behavior described by other witnesses. A man in a pickup truck had approached her on the road. appearing calm and persuasive. He presented himself as someone who could help, suggesting there was an issue with her vehicle and offering assistance. She accepted the interaction, and at first, nothing seemed immediately threatening. But as the drive continued, the behavior changed. The driver repeatedly pulled off the road, each time offering explanations that suggested he needed to check or confirm something about the surroundings. Investigators later interpreted as attempts to identify a location where he could isolate her. The situation escalated when the woman became increasingly uneasy. At some point she resisted. The encounter turned physical. She fought back. The man ultimately pushed her out of the vehicle. She survived, but sustained a broken ankle. It suggested that the behavior seen along Route 29 was not random. It showed that the offender may actively testing approaches, refining his method, and identifying opportunities where a victim might trust him enough to stop. And placed in that context, Alicia's disappearance no longer looked like an isolated moment. It looked like a culmination. For Alicia's family, however, none of this provided answers. It only expanded the uncertainty. A simple drive had turned into a disappearance without explanation, and now the first fragments of a larger and more troubling pattern were beginning to surface. For more than 2 months after Alicia Showalter Reynolds disappeared, there was no confirmed trace of her whereabouts. Then, on May 7, 1996, the case changed again. Alicia's remains were discovered in Culpeper County, Virginia, in a remote wooded area near Lignum. The location was not along a main road or in an obvious clearing. It was a secluded stretch of land being used for timber, far removed from the highway where she was last seen. The discovery came after a local worker noticed vultures circling above the area and went to investigate. What he found led authorities to a shallow grave. Investigators later concluded that Alicia was likely killed around the same time she disappeared, or shortly afterward. The condition and location of the body suggested a rapid transition from abduction to concealment, with little indication of a long-term holding location. The placement of the remains became a central point in the investigation. The area was not easily visible from major routes, and it raised a critical question for investigators. How did the offender know this location? The implication was significant. It suggested familiarity with the surrounding geography. Someone who understood the roads, the terrain, and the isolation of certain areas. Not just a passing traveler, but someone who knew where they could go unseen. As the investigation moved forward, attention eventually turned toward individuals whose histories or behaviors placed them under scrutiny in similar cases. Over time, multiple suspects were considered, but 2 names became particularly prominent in public and investigative discussion. One was Darrell Rice, a man who had been linked at one point to other abduction investigations. His name surfaced as a possible connection to the Route 29 case due to similarities in patterns being examined at the time. However, despite initial interest, investigators ultimately stepped back from that theory. Another was Richard Mark Evanitz, a suspected serial rapist and killer whose activities and timeline placed him under consideration during broader investigations into violent crimes. His name would later surface in connection with other confirmed cases through DNA evidence, though authorities did not publicly establish a direct link to Alicia's death. Neither suspect was ever conclusively tied to the crime, and neither provided the definitive answer to what happened on Route 29. In the years following the discovery of Alicia Showalter Reynolds' remains, the investigation continued, but it never reached the point of a confirmed resolution. No individual has ever been publicly confirmed as the Route 29 stalker responsible for Alicia's disappearance and death. Despite extensive investigative work, no definitive DNA match has been announced, and no arrest has been made in connection with the case. 3 decades have passed since Alicia Showalter Reynolds left home on a Saturday morning and never arrived at her destination. Alicia's parents have spoken over the years about who she was before that morning. A daughter, a student, someone building a future while balancing the routines of everyday life. Those details remain fixed in time, unchanged by everything that followed. What has changed is everything around them.